the sky cracked open. Not with thunder, not with lightning, but with something older, something that had been sleeping beneath the earth for 1,000 years. A golden fissure split the horizon, spilling molten light across the savannah like blood from a wound that refused to heal. The grasses bent backward, trembling. The wind stopped breathing, and in that impossible silence, every creature in the valley felt it. Something ancient had awakened. A young lion stood at the edge of a cliff, his amber eyes wide, his mane barely grown. His name was Kato, and he had never seen the sky bleed before. Behind him, the elders whispered prayers. The herd scattered. The birds fell silent. But Kato didn't move. He couldn't. Because deep in his chest, something stirred a pull, a hum, a voice without words that said, "This is meant for you." The golden light pulsed once more, then vanished, leaving only a single glowing ember drifting down from the heavens. It landed softly in the dirt before him, still burning, still humming with impossible warmth. Kato stepped forward, and the world shifted. The valley was called Amareth, a sprawling wilderness where the sun painted the earth in shades of copper and gold. It was a place of balanced predator and prey, storm and stillness, life and death woven together in a rhythm older than memory. The lions of Amareth were not rulers. They were guardians, protectors of the ancient harmony that kept the valley alive. Kato had been born under a broken moon, the youngest of 3 brothers. His father, Theron, was the valley's greatest protector, a lion whose roar could shake mountains, whose presence commanded respect from every living thing. But Kato was different. Smaller, quieter, where his brothers were fierce and bold. Kato was thoughtful, curious, always watching the world with questions his father couldn't answer. "You think too much?" Theron would say, his voice deep as thunder. "A guardian acts. A guardian protects, that is all." But Kato couldn't stop wondering. What are we protecting, and from what? The valley had been peaceful for generations. The herds grazed. The rivers flowed. The predators hunted only what they needed. There were no wars, no threats, no darkness creeping at the edges. And yet, the elders spoke in hushed tones of something called the Silenza force that had once tried to consume the valley, a shadow that devoured sound, light, and life itself. "It was defeated long ago," they said. "It will never return." But Kato had seen the way his father's eyes darkened when the elders spoke of it. He had heard the tremor in Theron's voice when he said, "We must always be ready." And now, standing before the glowing ember, Kato understood. The silence was waking. The ember pulsed in the dirt, casting long shadows across the cliff. Kato crouched low, his breath shallow, his heart pounding. Up close, he could see it wasn't just fire, it was something alive. Something that moved and breathed and sang. Tiny golden veins spiraled through its core, shifting like rivers of light. "Don't touch it!" "Don't." Kato spun around. His brother Riven stood behind him, his mane dark and wild, his eyes sharp with suspicion. Riven was the eldest, the strongest, the one their father trusted most. He moved like a storm fast, powerful, unstoppable. "It's dangerous," Riven said, stepping closer. "We don't know what it is." "It fell from the sky," Kato said softly. "It's trying to tell us something. Or it's trying to kill us." Riven's voice was hard. "Father will know what to do. Step away." But Kato didn't move. He couldn't. The ember's hum had grown louder, resonating deep in his chest, pulling him forward like a tide. He reached out. "Kato!" "No!" His paw touched the ember, and the world exploded. Light consumed him, not painful, but overwhelming, a flood of images, sounds, emotions, crashing through his mind all at once. He saw a valley covered in shadow. The grasses withered, the rivers dried, the sky turned black, and the stars went out one by one. A roar that shattered mountains, not his father's roar. Something older, something that came from the earth itself. A figure standing at the heart of the darkness, tall, cloaked in smoke, eyes like dying embers. It spoke, and its voice was the sound of silence, the absence of everything. You cannot stop what has already begun. And then, a final image. A golden lion standing alone on a cliff, roaring into the void. The roar didn't stop the darkness, but it held it back, just long enough for the valley to survive. The vision shattered. Kato gasped. stumbling backward. The ember was gone. In its place, a faint golden mark glowed on his power spiral, like the veins he'd seen inside the ember. It pulsed once, then faded beneath his fur. Riven stared at him, eyes wide. "What did you see?" Kato's voice was barely a whisper. "The silence is coming back." Theron stood at the center of the valley's sacred grove, surrounded by the Elda's ancient lions, leopards, elephants, and birds who had lived long enough to remember the old stories. The air was thick with tension. Kato stood before them, his head low, his heart racing. "You touched the ember," Theron said, his voice cold. "You disobeyed the first rule of a guardian, never act without understanding." "I had to," Kato said. "It was calling to me." "Calling to you." One of the elders, a scarred leopard named Ashira, stepped forward. "The ember is a warning, not a gift. It marks the return of the silence. And you, foolish cub, have awakened it." "No," Kato said, his voice stronger now. "It was already awake. The ember was trying to show me how to stop it." "Stop it." Theron's eyes blazed. "You think you, the smallest of my sons, can stop what our ancestors barely survived?" The words cut deep. Kato lowered his gaze. But then, a voice spoke soft, ancient, and filled with sorrow. It came from Elder Nayara, the oldest elephant in the valley. Her eyes were clouded with age, but her voice carried the weight of centuries. "The ember does not lie," she said. "It chooses who it calls, and if it chose Kato, then he is the one who must face what is coming." Theron's jaw tightened. "He is not ready." "None of us are," Nira said. "But the valley does not wait for readiness. It demands courage." She turned to Kato, her gaze piercing. "The silence feeds on fear, on doubt, on the absence of hope. It cannot be fought with strength alone. It must be faced with something stronger." "What?" Kato asked. Nayara's trunk gently touched the mark on his paw. "A roar that refuses to be silenced." Kato left at dawn, alone. His father had forbidden him from going. Riven had called him reckless. But Nayara had whispered the truth. "If you do not go, the valley will fall." The ember's vision had shown him a place, the Hala Peak, a mountain range at the edge of the valley where the first guardians had fought the silence. If there were answers, they would be there. The journey was long. The savannah gave way to dense forests, then rocky cliffs, then finally the jagged peaks that pierced the sky like broken teeth. The air grew colder. The light dimmed, and with every step, Kaito felt the weight of the mark on his paw growing heavier. He wasn't alone for long. On the second day, he met Zira, a young cheetah with silver spots and eyes like lightning. She was fast, sharp-tongued, and had been tracking him since he left the valley. "You're going to get yourself killed?" she said, falling into step beside him. "Why do you care?" Kato asked. "Because if you die, the silence wins. And I'm not ready to live in a world without sound." She grinned. And despite everything, Kato smiled. On the fourth day, they met Bomani, a massive pangolin with scales like ancient armor. He spoke little, but his presence was steady, grounding. He had lost his family to the silence years ago and had been waiting for a chance to fight back. "I will walk with you," Bomani said simply. And so, the three of them climbed. The peaks were a graveyard. Bones littered the ground, lions, elephants, birds, creatures Kato didn't recognize. The wind howled through the cliffs, carrying whispers that sounded almost like voices. And at the center of it all stood a massive stone archway covered in ancient carvings. Kato stepped closer. The carvings showed the same vision he'd seen, a valley consumed by shadow, a lion standing alone, a roar that split the darkness. "This is where it happened," Zera whispered, "where the first guardians fought." "And lost?" Bomani added grimly. "No," Kaito said, tracing the carvings with his paw. "They didn't lose. They held it back." The mark on his paw began to glow. The archway shuddered. The carvings lit up, one by one, until the entire structure blazed with golden light. And then, from the center of the arch, a figure emerged. It was a lion, but not alive. A spirit, translucent and glowing, its mane flowing like smoke. Its eyes were ancient, sad, and filled with recognition. "You carry the Ember's mark," the spirit said, its voice echoing through the peaks. "You are the next guardian." "I don't know how to stop it," Kato said, his voice breaking. "I'm not strong enough. Strength is not what the silence fears." the spirit said. It fears the one thing it cannot consume, a voice that refuses to be forgotten. The spirit stepped closer, its form flickering. The silence is not a creature. It is the absence of all things, hope, memory, sound, light. It grows when we forget who we are. It dies when we remember. How do I make it remember? Kato asked. The spirit's eyes glowed brighter. You roar! They returned to the valley to find it already falling. The sky had turned gray. The grasses were withering. The rivers ran black, and at the heart of it all, a massive shadow rose from the earth's silence, a towering void that swallowed everything it touched. Kato's father stood at the edge of the valley, roaring, fighting, but his voice was fading. Riven fought beside him, but even his strength was not enough. Kato ran forward, his heart pounding. Father Theron turned, his eyes wide. Kato, no, run. But Kato didn't run. He stood at the edge of the silence, the mark on his paw blazing, and he understood. The silence wasn't just darkness. It was forgetting. It was the valley forgetting its purpose, its guardians forgetting their strength, the world forgetting its voice, and Kato would not let it be forgotten. He opened his mouth and he roared, the roar that shook the world. It wasn't the loudest roar. It wasn't the strongest, but it was true. It carried the memory of every guardian who had ever stood in the valley. It carried the hope of every creature who had ever called Amareth home. It carried the light of the ember, the wisdom of the elders, the courage of his friends. And the silence trembled. The shadow recoiled, shrieking, its form fracturing. Light poured through the cracks golden, blinding, unstoppable. The sky split open, and the sun returned. The silence screamed one final time, and then it was gone. The valley healed slowly. The grasses grew. The rivers ran clear. The herds returned. Kato stood on the cliff where it had all begun, the mark on his paw, now a permanent reminder. His father stood beside him, pride and sorrow in his eyes. You were right, Theron said quietly. Strength is not enough. A guardian must also remember. Kato nodded, and I'll make sure the valley never forgets. But as the sun set, casting long shadows across the valley, Kato saw something in the distance, a flicker of darkness, just for a moment, at the edge of the horizon. The silence was gone, but something else was stirring. If you want more cinematic 3D animated stories like this, subscribe and follow the journey ahead.